Hi everyone, and welcome to CXAfrica and XAfrica. You guys know I am a communications professional, so public relations and even international relations is something that I focus on. And so today, I promised everyone that I was going to make the corollary to African culture by focusing in on a specific tribe, and that would be my own, the African American one. I'm going to give you some tips so that you can better understand the culture and a little bit of the history. So the first thing you need to know about African American culture is that it has similarities to both West and Central African culture. This is a very important thing to realize, because if you're from one of those cultures, you're going to immediately start noticing things that are very similar to your own. So don't be shocked about seeing that. And we see this a lot when we're talking about we see this on the continent, in fact. So I'm going to give you an example of jollof rice. We all know what that is. It's been made quite famous, but you have jollof rice that is being made, let's say, in Nigeria and also in Ghana. But a lot of people don't know that jollof rice is actually native to Senegambia. So do we say that Nigeria and Ghana knocked off Senegambia's jollof rice and that their jollof rice is fake and that their culture is fake because they are eating jollof rice that originated in Senegambia? No, we understand that to be a part of their culture, but this kind of sharing happens when cultures are together or when they have some tangential relationship. And that is exactly what has happened with African American culture. Just as there are Western influences in West Africa because of colonization, and there are Middle Eastern influences on the East African side because of the Arab slave trade, I think we need to understand that those are the same things you're going to see in play when you meet African Americans. So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is that African American culture is very inclusive. And this comes from the fact that it is born out of groups that had to include each other in order to survive. So yes, people did come from different tribes that came here, but in order to survive, they literally had to amalgamate together. They had for protection, for safety, often against their will in some cases. But this happened, and this allowed them to be inclusive. So when there was a new African that was brought to a plantation, people had a tendency to bring that person in very close, take care of them, nurse them to health, if they were sick, help them to understand some of the rules and learn the language. So this is very important to understand. So if you see a lot of African Americans, they will automatically assume that you are one of them, because for the longest time you have to understand that African Americans have been the largest and the only tribe here in the United States of America. And I'm calling them a tribe because so that you can understand it if you are from an African tribe. But for the most part, African Americans are not tribal at all. They don't see that, and they see being able to interact with you. They don't really have a problem with that because they are used to being extremely inclusive. So that's the first thing you want to understand. They're extremely inclusive, and they have a history of including other Africans. African Americans, just as we learned that there is a public and a private face, African Americans also have that when it comes to family, when it comes to significant others. A lot of times you won't see a lot of African Americans walking and holding hands, and kind of public displays of affection, because African Americans have a tendency to use in their demeanor and how they interact with the world to sort of protect their space. That is kind of like the proverbial wall that is around the African home. So, African Americans, they have sort of like a protective space where they kind of put a little bit of space between themselves and the other individual. And if you're an African person, you'll feel that when you first meet them. However, if you become their friend, if you marry one or you're dating one or something, you'll find that the distance is closed significantly and more so behind closed doors, not in the public eye. African Americans can be extremely affectionate, extremely romantic, and just really touchy-feely, but that is often not demonstrated, in the public self. And as I've said before, I think one of the reasons, this is just my theory, one of the reasons I think that you will find, that African Americans are really very intimate with each other with the private self, is because of the nature of the way that they live. So they were under a lot of pressure, on the outside with the ravages of slavery, Jim Crow, and all of the different forms that came afterward. So they had a lot of pressures on the outside, and that had a tendency to amalgamate them very close. And they understood that at any time a loved one could be taken away, could be killed, could be maimed. And so there was this idea of cherishing the relationships that they had, and oftentimes you had to cherish that relationship in private. So it created this kind of public and private self in terms of intimacy with others. The other thing you'll have to understand is that African Americans do have a tendency to use slang or pidgin English. And the thing about African American culture is that because it is so widely exported in the United States, a lot of people don't understand that many of the slangs, many of the popular culture ideas that they think are just American are actually African American. And that's because for whatever reason, African American culture has been the cool thing here in the United States, in the same way that Caribbean culture is the really cool thing to be in the UK. And I can honestly tell you that if right now I broke out into West African pidgin English and I started sort of affecting some of the gestures and movements, there would be some West African people out there that would be a bit offended by that. But you have to understand, for African Americans, that happens on a daily basis throughout many cultures. If you've gone outside, if you're an African American person, I can say this for myself, when I travel, I meet people who meet me with my own slangs and cultural sayings, and that's really mind-blowing. It's wild. I don't think a lot of other cultures have had that kind of experience of going outside of your country and meeting people who know your pidgin, know your slang, know certain parts of your culture, because it's been so widely broadcast. You have to remember that African American people have their own foods. We call it soul foods. And a lot of these foods were amalgamated from what we could get, in the dire situations that we were in. But I've noticed that the way in which we actually prepared those foods are very similar to many African dishes. I remember the first time that I had West African food, I was eating it. I never forget it. I was eating it. I was like, this tastes like the food I eat. This tastes like soul food. So it's really important to understand that you're going to see those similarities. Just like I said with the jollof rice example, civilizationally, you're going to see similarities. And that will be true whether you come to the United States and meet African Americans, or whether you leave your own country and go to another African country, you're going to see those similarities as well. African Americans have this idea of authenticity. So they really believe you need to be honest and upfront with who you are and how you feel. Now, this was really important, I think, because of some of the things that we had to endure, and also because you had people coming from different cultural groups. So your ability to be authentic and to not put on airs and to be quote unquote real was very important. So when you meet people, when an African American person meets you, if everybody is, maybe engaged in some activity, if you don't join them in it, they might assume that you're not being real. Or, if you don't respond in a certain way, they might think, oh, I think you're putting on airs. And this is really not a good thing, because they're going to assume that you're being elitist, or they're going to assume that you don't want to associate with them. And this will probably, they will then just sort of draw away from you, or they'll think, oh, this is a different kind of, Black person. Well, if you're really upfront and you're honest with African Americans, I think they will appreciate you. They'll appreciate if you are quote unquote down to earth, and you're okay to laugh, and you're not uptight, as they say. So I think that's one thing to remember. Most African Americans, in terms of family, they have an interesting structure in the sense that they believe in the family unit. They also do believe in having, other family members around, but, you have to understand that there are migration situations that were going on. People were running from persecution and different kinds of changes in the country. So sometimes that broke up families in order for people to find work, or in order for people to get away from, violence. They had to move and get around places. And of course, as you know, the institution of slavery broke up families. So it was really a situation where you will see some pull and push in terms of the external having a very huge effect on the family for African American people. But many African American people, they really try to sustain that family through things like family reunions. And you may not have heard of this, but the family reunion is something that a lot of African Americans do, where they get together every year. That the nuclear family is a part of African American culture and is very important. So African Americans are monogamous. They do not believe in marrying several people. If there is some sort of thing done like that, then they acknowledge that that is an aberration from the family unit, and it's considered as taboo or something that you're not supposed to do. But for the most part, people believe in having only one spouse at a time. So if you're from an African culture where that is still practiced, you do definitely want to have those conversations so that you can respect their culture as well. They really have a tendency to be very helpful. And what do I mean by being very helpful? They have this idea of, if you need some help, most African American people will help you in some way. They'll give you a break. They'll make a way for you. They'll do something for you. And the reason this occurred is because, like I said, you have these Africans who are amalgamated here, and they're under extreme pressure and duress. So they understand that they need help. People need help. And so the African American, probably, more than any other group here in the United States, is more apt to help you because they sort of put themselves in that position. They understand, or they assume, that you need help. That we're highly connected. We feel like we belong to each other. Even though there's a high degree of individuality or individualism in the country, and also some in African American culture, people do feel a sense that if I extend myself to you, you should respond in kind with some form of kindness, some form of, showing your best side, being genial, being friendly, making small talk. It's a real thing. You'll find, African American people will just start talking to you about anything. And, they'll be talking about things in their own life to you, because they feel like they can do that. There is this belonging to each other. So African American people do feel like they belong to each other. And that is why you may find that there isn't this idea of tribes, because we don't have tribes, and we are the largest tribe. We feel that everybody belongs to us. And because of that, we feel there's a level of familiarity there, and that we can command that familiarity at any time, even if that's not the case for you, because an African person is coming from a place where there are tribes, and we have specific things that we do, and they do that over there, and we don't mix with those people, and we don't do this. That's not here in America. That's not here. So everyone belongs to everyone. So if you're trying to make those delineations and those, no, I'm different, we don't do that, African American people are not going to understand that. They're going to think you don't like them. They're going to think that you're being rude. They're going to think that, you're being standoffish. It's just because, we have been amalgamated here, and there's been this grouping, this understanding that we all belong to each other. But you do have to understand that, when you rebuff that, or you decide you don't want that, that comes with a whole ball of fire. So people often think it's really rude if you do that. It's kind of like if you're in West Africa, and you're eating with your left hand. It's just like, it's just considered really gross. So in that same manner, where that seems really off-putting, it's really off-putting here in the United States to rebuff that level of kindness and inclusion. And their background here in the United States, we've been here for over 400 years. So this isn't just, a couple of generations. These are people who they literally do not know a life outside of here. So if you're telling people, you just need to, I really recommend people going into Africa and doing business, etc. But really telling people who have lived here for generations and generations, just go to Africa and start doing business, or you need to get with the program and go to Africa. That just doesn't make sense because they don't understand that. They don't know that. It's a foreign place for them because all of their life they've lived here. All of their life they've spoken English. All of their life they have known this culture that they have created. And it's important to understand that African American culture, it would be a subculture in America. So it is its own culture, and it is a subculture, and it is viable. It's been here for 400 years, or over 400 years. So you really can't invalidate people's experiences in that way. If you come here and maybe you were second generation, you have to understand the comparison is, there's no comparison to having your grandfather, fought in the Civil War. There's no comparison between coming here on an airplane and having your grandfather who actually fought in the Civil War, and this is literally what happened. People can trace themselves so far back. They can trace themselves back to, before America was even America. So it's really important to understand the context when you have these conversations with African Americans, should you come to the United States. So I'm going to give you the two definitions of what culture is so that you can be better informed when you come to America or anybody's country, so you can know what culture is. So the first definition of culture is the arts and the other manifestations of human achievement regarded collectively. That's it. And then the second one is any customs, arts, social institutions, achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. So by that definition, you can see that African Americans, they have a very specific culture, even if it is shared all over the world via media, it really is theirs and it's specific. Regardless of how old it may be, it's something they've practiced for hundreds of years as well. So another thing to realize, to give you some context, because a lot of times, we don't understand the context because we don't really understand culture, period. Even in our own countries, even if you're from an African country, you may not understand the context of culture there. So I'll give you an example. So one of the oldest African cultures on the continent is Kemet, the people of Egypt, and also the Khoisan people. So if you understand anything about migrations and, the different kinds of people groups that are in Africa, you'll understand that these are older groups. So I'm going to make this a little bit easier. The Southern African countries, a little bit in Southern Africa, they're some of the oldest groups of African people. And then, of course, the people of Egypt, and I'm talking about the original people of Egypt in, the Nile Valley area. These are some of the oldest cultures in the world, where you will find things like the oldest artifacts, the oldest mines, the oldest metalworking. These cultures have been around for years and years, but that doesn't devalue cultures like those found in Senegal or Ghana or Nigeria or even Cameroon. It doesn't negate those cultures just because those cultures are older than theirs. Okay, and that is the same way. You have to learn how to see that cultures are going to grow and merge. And just as you will have two tribes that will, merge and become one tribe, in Africa, you have to see the same thing has happened here. And I'm trying to give you some context so that when you come to the United States, you have a better framework of how to see African American people and to appreciate the culture. If you're going to come to the United States, I would suggest you actually, of course, talk to someone who has been there, but also talk to African Americans and get to know them so they can tell you some things so that you can really understand what's going on there, because sometimes when you're coming from the outside, you may not totally understand it, especially if you're not having conversations with people that are on the ground. So for instance, when I went to visit Nigeria in 2018, I was absolutely sure to interact with the average everyday people. I didn't want to just interact with just one echelon of people. I made sure to interact with a wide variety of people and talk to them so that I could get their take on it from their point of view. And that is why it really kind of revolutionized my understanding of even Nigeria and Nigerians. But if you are an African descendant person and you're going someplace and you are not aware of the dynamics of the African descendant people that are there, I think that's a bit irresponsible. And I think we need to move away from that as we're moving ahead and we're becoming more proactive, we're being more forward thinking, we're leaving behind some of these, backward ideals about, separation of, this is not my tribe and you're not doing this right. So we're moving ahead so that we can really be successful. And if you're coming to another country, it's obviously on you to be as gracious as you possibly can when you're coming into somebody else's home, somebody else's culture, somebody else's place where they live and have grown up and known their whole life. I truly feel that way. So whenever I go to anyone's culture, regardless of who they may be, I often try to extend the most courteousness that I can. I know that I'm not going to get everything right. I know that I'm not going to know everything, but I often do try and do my best to, present something that doesn't offend the other person. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this micro class has helped you and you learned something from it. Definitely, if you have a chance, contact me. My contact information is down at the bottom. You can reach out to me if you have any questions or you'd like some support or help working on a project. So thank you so much for tuning in to XAfrica and CXAfrica. I cannot wait to see you in the next one. Bye.